Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Josh.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you at Pioneer Works. This space of commune arts and radical thinking that we call home. And I wanted actually to start, I want to talk to you about the title of this book. I want to talk to you about many aspects of this book. But I wonder if we could start, speaking of institutions and places of learning, you wrote a beautiful op-ed for the New York Times last week about Berkeley and about your time at the place where you did undergrad, but also where you went back to give a commencement address a few weeks ago. And you wrote about the ways in which things that you learned there, especially about Antonioni and film, but you also wrote about what it was that you actually learned there, which was sort of learning to look at everything and sort of figure out how to be a writer or sort of inhabit the person that you became. But I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what that was like to go back there. You wrote so movingly about returning to Berkeley. This is a place that we share. I went to grad school there, you went undergrad. But what was it like to be back there for this commencement moment?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear okay? Is it like boomy? It's all right. So thanks for asking about that and for reading that op-ed. So one funny side note to being invited to give a commencement at my own alma mater of UC Berkeley is that I was asked by the rhetoric department. And rhetoric at Berkeley is a very particular thing. It's super intellectual. It's like the most sophisticated and rigorous program and pursuit in English. It's English combined with theology and
law,
classics
all kinds
and
of stuff,
law
yeah.
and philosophy of law. And I have the narrator of this novel, Creation Lake, is a dropout from the rhetoric department at Berkeley. And she's a kind of devil in disguise, a cynical person who does change a little bit over the course of the novel, but early in the book describes her classmates in the rhetoric department as people who constantly do scare quotes with their fingers in the air. And it's a way of establishing distance and irony in the things that you discuss. And she says that she would love to see a blade finger height in the air, lopping off the digits of these scare quoting know-it-alls in the rhetoric department. So when I got the invitation to give a commencement at rhetoric, I was wondering, is this a joke? Like,
right.
Are they in on the joke, or have they just not read the book yet?
What was the answer? Did you inquire? Had they read the book?
Well, the Dean of Humanities who introduced me mentioned this passage in the book, and everybody chuckled, so I think it was fine. But to go back and give that commencement, I wrote about this in the New York Times, but I had prepared a speech. They said it's 30 minutes. That's a long speech. And I basically decided this speech is for a minority of people in the graduating audience. And it's for the people who don't have an internship, who don't have a fellowship, who didn't apply to law school, who do not know what the fuck they are going to do when they graduate. Because I didn't know that, and it wasn't that I was incapable of applying to grad school, but I was spiritually incapable of being excited about the new world. At that time, it was 1990. The United States was about to go to war with Iraq. Some people don't remember that. Bush the father. We were going into a recession. And I don't know, after being at Berkeley and going through all of the sort of political convulsions of being a student from 1985 to 1990, being involved with the anti-apartheid movement, which successfully really helped to dismantle apartheid in South Africa, so much so that Nelson Mandela came to Berkeley to thank the students when he got out of prison. But to be in a place that was unprotected from the real world just put me in this position where I didn't feel excited about becoming an employee. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I thought I'll prepare a speech that is very honest about my own difficulties. It's a touchy time for some people, graduating from college and joining the real world. It can be very painful and disorienting, I think. That's what it was for me. And I got a job making sandwiches at a brewery. From there, it took me a few years to figure out how to use the parts of myself I thought secretly might be valuable to marshal them into writing. I mean, that's what a writer does, is kind of uses all of herself, but that was not a quick process for me. So I talked about that at the commencement, and I arrived there several hours early and walked around the Berkeley campus, and that was what my op-ed was about, was like encountering the ghost of myself on campus and just going, I had no idea what I was doing. And there's this really beautiful, I didn't put this in the op-ed, but there's a really stunning view of the Golden Gate Bridge from near the Campanile in the center of campus. I don't remember ever once noticing that view. I mean, I had gone to Berkeley. It was the only college, my family said, like, if you go to a UC school, we'll pay for your housing and you'll pay for your tuition, because my tuition was $500 a semester. So I only applied to one college. I drove myself over the Bay Bridge to go to college. I just had no idea what I was doing. I had no real appreciation or understanding that this was like this great, legendary public university. And so I guess the op-ed was mostly just about how disorienting and confusing and overwhelming going to a massive public university can be for a student, but also how lucky it was in retrospect.
Totally. No, and I mean, I think you articulate that so beautifully in that piece. And also, you mentioned in particular, as I say, certain of the ideas and works of art that you encountered there, namely Antonioni, and you make this mention of Red Desert and this professor that you had who really marked you. But then the piece becomes about your identification with Fred Wiseman, actually, and his sort of depiction of Berkeley and sort of this stance of being on the outside, or sort of noticing, or sort of feeling this sense of distance from all these people who are sort of just rushing ahead. And you talk about and articulate the ways in which this is akin to becoming a writer and being the writer who you are. Yeah.
Right. I forgot about the film part of your question. Yeah. So I mean, this is probably common for people many years after their college degree, seeing that the classes that they took that were the sort of primary components of their course of study may not be the ones that affected them most dramatically. And for me, the only class I really remember at Berkeley is this Antonioni class, which was just a random elective that I lucked into. I have no idea if I took it pass fail or for a grade or what grade I got. I never once raised my hand and spoke. I never once had a direct interaction with the professor. I just went to the class. His name was Seymour Chapman. He was kind of the person who invented auteur theory. And he taught Antonioni movies. Like every week you would just go and watch an Antonioni movie. And I was 17 years old. And it's an age when you sort of have the overconfidence to think that these very existential films featuring Monica Vitti in post-war and 1960s Italy have something to do with you. And so to this day, Antonioni for me is like home cooking. I can watch La Notte or Il Deserto Rosso and feel like I'm coming back to myself because I forged an attachment to the mood and the look and the framing and the low level of dialogue, to room tone. And then Frederick Wiseman made this movie about Berkeley called At Berkeley. And so as I told the students at the commencement, like, your university is so storied that Frederick Wiseman made a film about it. But I love Fred Wiseman's films, even as they're very cold. I mean, Wiseman in a way is he's a cold figure. And I've interviewed him, and I interviewed him about this movie, Juvenile Hall, which relates to some things that I'm interested to do with people's experiences of the justice system. And that's a personal interest of mine from my own life and the people I grew up with, and also figures very heavily in my novel, The Mars Room. When I interviewed Fred about Juvenile Hall, I said, do you ever, it's a movie about the juvenile courts in Memphis, Tennessee in 1973. And it follows one judge who tries something like, his caseload is like 400, 600 cases a day. And so you see him day in and day out, and the people who pass through his courtroom, and they just those these, like, some of them are these epic kids. And I said to Fred, do you think about these people? And he said, never. And I just thought, whether that's true or not, it's what he's saying, and you have to take him at his word, which means he's interested in how they come up and manifest on the screen in the film, if they make it into the edit of the film, and that's it. The film is over, and his concern with their lives has also terminated. And I can't help but wonder about people and the way that they become kind of like eternal figures inside the film, but also as something more like literary characters. So I just learned so much from his movies. I mean, Welfare is another example of a film that features just these incredible people passing through the New York City welfare system.
Right. And this, it makes me think actually what you're saying. This is one thing actually that you share with the narrator of this book. There's many things you don't share, I'm glad to say. But she's someone, she loves Italian films. She's into Antonioni. She's into La Dolce Vita as well. But as we were talking before this, we spoke about, yes, we share Berkeley, and I promise we'll get to Creation Lake in a moment. But I was just recalling that at the Telluride Film Festival about 10 years ago, where you served as guest director, I had you to thank for seeing Cocksucker Blues for the first time as well, which is this amazing film. I don't know if people have seen this about the Rolling Stones.
You've never seen it before?
I'd never seen it until
lucky you to see it there.
That's it. And a beautiful big screen, thanks to you. You showed an Agnes Varda film, I believe, there too, Uncle Yanko, that our friend Tom Luddy produced. But in any case, the narrator of this book, of Creation Lake, she is someone, yes, she's a dropout from rhetoric. As you were talking about the scare quotes, I was reminded too, there's a riff in here where he's talking about that evolutionarily, our fingers, right, as humans, we used to grip trees, now we don't really do that. But maybe this is what they're for now, is doing the scare quotes, right? But in any case, right, doesn't Bruno talk about this, about what our fingers are for?
He does.
Yeah, he does. Sadie Smith, though, let's talk about the narrator of this book. I read an interview where you spoke about how when you're writing a novel, and the narrators of your novels have been sort of people from different walks of life, stages of life. This particular narrator is someone who, you've called her a devil in a way. She's she's a tricky character. She is someone who's involved in manipulating people in secrets and trying to make bad things happen, essentially. But I also heard you say once that this novel, of course, brings together many of your preoccupations, thinking about radical politics, thinking about past, present, future, thinking about art, thinking about France. How did you come to her as the sort of vehicle that you needed, or the sort of voice that you needed to tell the stories and to sort of depict the world that this book depicts? Yeah,
so that was actually a pretty long process. Arriving at the narrator, for people who haven't read the book, is a disgraced former FBI agent who, is college educated and a polyglot, so she's fairly sophisticated. And after she's fired from the FBI for entrapping a young man whose conviction is overturned because his lawyer is able to establish proof of entrapment. And that's not supposed to happen. And she's quite angry that she's been fired from the FBI and blames this young guy, rather than noticing that her goal was to destroy his life and get him sent to federal prison. And I actually borrowed those details from a real case, which was against a young person named Eric McDavid. He was an eco-activist in the Bay Area, Northern California, and was entrapped by this FBI agent. And he was arrested and charged and sentenced to 21 years in federal prison. He served 9 of those years, and then, like in my book, the lawyer was able to prove that this woman had entrapped him, and he was set free like that day. So I knew that these people existed. Infiltrators working for federal agencies who specifically starting in the early 2000s, really during the anti-globalization campaigns, started infiltrating leftist activists, and also what they were calling the Green Scare in Northern California and Washington and Oregon, infiltrating environmental activists. And it's a really bizarre world. Like, in some of the cases, it almost seems like a cop figured out that they could get an expense account by bilking their supervisor into believing that, like, climate clowns, quote unquote, are a genuine threat to the energy sector. Like, you know, people who stage a kind of theater performance in front of a coal-fired power plant are suddenly being infiltrated by these narcs. It would seem like a great concept for a novel, but it didn't occur to me for a long time that my narrator would be one of those people. Instead, I began with the region where the book is set, and not just for its geography. It's fictionalized, it's called the Guyenne, but that name is borrowed from a name that was used up until the French Revolution for a large swath of central southwestern France, which is a place I know rather intimately, and also happens to be a world where, starting in the 1970s, French radicals who had decided, like, there is no future in trying to radicalize French factory workers. Like, there isn't going to be a revolution based on urban discontent. And instead, there was this idea that the French...
Kids are like... Go on. The kids are loving it. Go ahead.
The French... poor baby. The French peasantry, there was this idea in the 70s, like among the sort of ultra-left, that the French peasantry is the true site of fierce resistance. And going all the way back, you can see why that is, and why people would believe that. Like, they were very involved in the French resistance. And then prior to that, you know, in the 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, all the way back to the 12th century, there are these waves of peasant revolts. So in the 1970s, all these people moved, for instance, to the Lozère, to a place called the Larzac Plateau, to work alongside sheep herders and the Catholic Church to occupy this land and prevent Francois Mitterrand from expanding an army base. And currently, there are people who've moved to these regions from Paris and Bordeaux to form communes and try to find a way to live in closer relationship to nature, get to know the local farmers and what their challenges are. It's very difficult to make a living as a farmer in France now, for a host of reasons. And so I had this idea of, like, the region and the texture and the kind of young person who would move from Paris to live on a commune. And the trajectory of the book would be that the commune gets raided by the police, which is what happened in the northern Corrèze to the village of Tarnac and the commune that was there in late 2008. They were raided by the police, whose sole charge against them, whose sole piece of evidence was the book that they had written, The Coming Insurrection, which some people may have read, I don't know. So I have this idea of, like, a drama and a milieu and something that really interests me from my own personal life. Right. But who was going to tell the story? I had a sense it should be an American, partly because I'm interested in the way that Americans in France can be sort of, you come into contact with your own savagery and sort of ideological individualism when you're with these people who have sort of a more coherent civic fabric. Like my French publisher likes to say, or doesn't like to say, but has said to me, the French state is inside of us. And, like, there's no state inside the right. American, you know. And so I was thinking about that distinction, but it didn't occur to me for a long time, so I didn't know how to write the book. I had this mentor for the activists in the form of this guy, Bruno Lacombe, who is an elder and a kind of primitivist who has retreated from contemporary life, which he describes as, we are hurtling toward extinction in a shiny driverless car. And the question is, how do we exit this car? And so his version of an answer is to turn to the very deep past and think about some ways of life that he attributes to the Neanderthals. It's a bit romantic. He changes his plan later in the book. But I didn't know who was going to tell it. And then like one day, 3 years into trying to write it, it occurred to me all of a sudden that the narrator who's reading Bruno's communiques and translating them for the reader, the first line of the book is his, Neanderthals were prone to depression, that's the first line, is being transposed by this woman, and she's kind of a hostile force. Like by page 3, I realized, oh, she's like that FBI agent in California. She's one of these devilish people. Because if you infiltrate a group and plant evidence of the plotting of political violence, it's not like she's a reactionary who thinks, oh, these people must be stopped.
Right.
She's motivated by something else entirely. So the character was a way of answering a question I'd had all along, which is, who are these people? And I knew that there's life after the public sector, because there was a cop named Mark Kennedy who was employed by the Metropolitan UK Police, and he infiltrated climate groups in Germany and England, and then the people in Tarnac in France. And after he was caught, he was confronted by the activists. They found all these passports in his glove box with his picture and different names, and they were like, dude, what's up? And he said, like, I've fallen in love with you guys, and I'm totally with the cause now, and I don't know what to do. I mean, I've come over to your side. And so they, like, didn't beat him up. And a week later, he disappeared. And he had been hired by Blackwater, the military contractor. So I knew for Sadie that there's life, you know, after you've been fired by the FBI.
Right, no, entirely. And so this is her backstory in California, and then she shows up and is doing these devilish things. But I found it so fascinating. It's so interesting to me to hear that you were working on the book for a few years before you came to the realization that she's the one who could sort of tell this story. And it's an interesting choice, I think, as well, because when I think about some of your other protagonists or narrators, like Reno, for example, in Flamethrowers, as a young person, she's a little more like the person you just described as, oh, if someone was a sort of idealistic younger person who moves to this commune and is checking it out, there's a natural sympathy the reader will have for that person.
Yeah.
Sadie is not someone who we are necessarily given to feel much warmth toward.
Nah.
But it's this fascinating thing of, I was thinking about this, and it makes total sense to me that, for those of you who haven't read the book, I imagine many of you have, but who would it be who would be privy to this guy's emails and then would also have access to all these other characters? And it's fascinating that you say, oh, this would be this person, this infiltrator.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a sort of noir element to the book. I mean, if you have a character who is a spy and a disgraced former federal agent, it seems natural then to turn to the genre of the detective novel and the spy novel. And like, I had fallen in love with these books by a crime writer named Jean-Patrick Manchette, who was writing in the 70s in France, and his books are incredibly funny, and they have this sort of like explosive flair when he gets to this penultimate scene where things are supposed to go down, whether it's a hitman coming out of retirement for one last job, or, you know, the kidnapping of a politician, etc. Everything goes wrong. There's like a kind of fiasco toward the end. So I sort of mapped my book in as a sort of Valentine to Manchette, who died, I think in 95 or something. But there's a way in which the detective novel it features a perspective that can illuminate what normally would remain dark in a literary novel among many different layers of a society, and also illuminate many different geographies and psychogeographies.
Yeah.
Because they have access to all kinds of different people, and they tend to be educated, and so she can read dossiers and just very loosely and in her own sort of hopefully crude and entertaining way summarize, like, who was Guy Debord and why was he a threat to the state?
Speaking of psychogeographies.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of advantages to have a narrator like that. And also, I'd never had a narrator who is able to manipulate other people and put plans in their heads and guns in their hands. Like, normally my narrators are a little more passive because that's what real life is like.
Right.
You're not just acting upon other people all the time. You're listening. You're paying attention. And like, Sadie pays attention, but only insofar as she can identify what she thinks is weakness in other people.
Right.
So it was like putting my book into the hands of somebody who was gonna ride roughshod over the other characters. And there is inherent risk in that, but I found the challenge exciting and kind of Nabokovian, if you will. I don't claim to bear his imprint, but I take lessons from Nabokov. Like, I think that part of the key to Pale Fire, which I love that book, is that he never loses contact with the reader. There's this thin filament that goes between Nabokov and you, and it passes through Charles Kinbote, but you can always glimpse him from some other angle. So like when Sadie brags to the reader that she never has to clean up her trash because she won't be returning to the same place twice, you're supposed to notice that this is no real way to live.
Right. We're not supposed to love this character. No, this is... No, not at all. I was so struck reading various other interviews you've given about this book, and now it's also nice because the thing about a paperback launch, it's been out in the world for a minute, and you've been able to sort of talk about it and think about it in public. And you said something really interesting about, speaking of your connection with the reader, or Nabokov's connection there too. You said, when I'm writing, I don't often think of my reader, actually. I'm thinking about myself and if I'm sort of entertained and the book is doing what I want it to do. I don't know if I'm getting that quote right, but is that how, what was it like, another way to ask this question, what was it like for you to live with Sadie Smith for the several months it took to write this book in her voice, and what has it been like to live with her since?
Right. Well, I mean, keep in mind that the first line, the first page of the book is all Bruno.
Totally.
And it's really two main characters, but it's kind of a trick, I guess, that there are two storytellers inside the voice of one person. Right. Because, you know, she narrates Bruno's ideas, and he kind of has these sort of sermons. And there is a way in which, like, the elder French philosopher has a priestly bearing and messages to impart, and I'm very personally familiar with this style of communication and this way of living and being marked by history. I'm interested in these people who've lived a long time and have sort of thought about, like, the convulsions and hopes and disappointments and paranoias and then new hopes of moving through historical time and thinking, like, are we ever going to have a social organization on Earth that really seems to replicate, like, what people are capable of as a human project? So I got to be with Bruno a lot, and by the time I figured out she was my narrator, I just plunged headlong into the writing, and I wrote the whole book in 14 months, and it was incredibly fun. It was just this totally electric experience for me, and with him, he just kind of opened like a flower in a way that felt like a sort of classical literary character to me, to the extent I'm capable of creating such a thing. He has a formation, intellectual formation. He has a series of losses. He was teaching his daughter to drive a tractor, and a tractor tipped over. Tractors are very dangerous, and the daughter dies, and then you know, he talks about his earlier childhood. He lost his whole family in World War II. He washes up on the streets of Paris as an orphan and meets Guy Debord, and like that maps to a real milieu that took place, which was Debord was drinking on the street with all these kids who were orphaned in World War II. And like, he disappears and goes and reads books and then comes back and hangs out with them to try to like pilfer from them the magic of living inside the freedom of owning nothing and caring about nothing. And so having a very free relationship to delinquency and illegality. And he was sort of like, how do you do that? So I was able to give Bruno all of these components that are things I've cared about, that I've picked up over the years, I've been fascinated by, and that was really, really fun. And then I would turn to her as the present action. And, it was like borrowing little bits of the genre and writing these chapters that I designed to be very short, like 3 pages each.
I love that about the book, the form of it.
Well, I was thinking about tempo, and you can have a book, let's say this is a little longer, but like 300 pages. If you have 30-page chapters, which is typically what my other novels have, it's like you have a long stretch and you get to know people and there's a world, and then it's a kind of movement and it ends, like a movement of a piece of music. So then you maybe have 10 of those in a book. If you have 3-page chapters, wait, how do I do the math on that? Right, you have 100 of those in the book, and it's in a way it's like hearing 6/8 time instead of 3/4 time, which is a very different way of dividing time. And I did think of the reader in the sense that I thought, what if me, who's mostly done more kind of literary novels, can introduce a kind of propulsion so that the reader feels like they're being pushed through this thing, like pushed and pushed. But then in terms of who I think of as I'm writing, it is whoever my God is, like my big daddy or big mama standing behind me. It's like, it's something I want to see emerge that could be a relationship between form and contact that doesn't have cheapness or compromise. It might have a conceit, but the conceit has to sort of have an interior. It has to feel real to me. I just think you can't anticipate what other people want. And if you do that, it can be a recipe for disaster. I often think of this project by Komar and Malamud. They did that, what was it called, like America's Most Popular Painting or something? And they traveled around the United States asking people, like, what elements in a painting do you like? And people would say, well, like a farm and a pond and some puffy clouds. And then they made that painting. And I kind of think if you start thinking about readers and what they might want, you're already underselling their level of sophistication. You have to trust your own crazy hallucinated dream. And there are other people out there, if they haven't had that dream already, when they experience your dream, they'll go, this is a world I know to exist now that I've read this book, which is how I feel like when I go to see an artwork that really speaks to me. I go, I never could have imagined this, but I know it to render something seen that existed but was unseen till now.
Right. And this is what art does when it works. It shows us what we haven't seen in that way. I'm going to turn to some questions from you all in a moment, but I'm speaking of time and sort of tempo, and I think this is one of the remarkable things that this book does, that kind of propulsive quality to it. But there's another way in which this book engages with time vis-a-vis Bruno, and that is this sort of sense of looking to the deep past as that which contains the sort of hints for a better future, right? And sort of thinking about all his musings on Neanderthals and so on, as he puts it, this story we must complicate, the story of the past, that is, if we were to know the truth about the ancient past, if we were to glimpse the truth about the world now, how to live in it, how to occupy the present, and where to go tomorrow. And I wonder, again, before I turn to questions from the audience, if you could talk a little about sort of where your interest in these ideas came from and what it was like to sort of get into Bruno's head, as it were, and sort of thinking about the deep past of the evolution of us as a species. He's got that whole riff about how humans, sapiens is just a blip on this much broader, deeper, longer history of which Neanderthals are part. All of us have 2% Neanderthal DNA or whatever it is. But I'd be really interested just to hear you talk about the ways in which sort of synthesizing all that thought, thinking about prehistory and evolution in relation to radical politics, and sort of where the seed for that comes from for you, or what the reading you did was.
Sure. I mean, a few things I could say about that. I started a few years ago thinking about, after reading some of the scientific advancements in molecular biology where they mapped the entire genome of the Neanderthal, and they were able to see where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had made contact. I mean, you know what that means, right? And 30,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago, and then an earlier species of each had made contact 500,000 years ago. And I went, every writer must go through this. I mean, what was that world like? It's very mysterious to think about people who lived before any of the written down. I also think that those people are they're primed for projection. There's a way in which, for me, when I go into a natural history museum or draw upon my childhood experiences, standing in front of the diorama with the man and the woman and the child, where you think these are like people, you know, there's some original platonic version of the person, and you think they know something about being human that I don't yet know because they're closer to the source. Like they experienced it in the most pure way. I mean, that's all a projection, but it interests me, and I even for a little while thought, what if I just wrote my next novel totally only about Homo sapiens and Neanderthals 35,000 years ago as they maybe crossed paths in Europe? William Golding wrote a novel like that called The Inheritors.
I was going to say, when I was like 13...
You read that?
No. I
Clan
read The Clan of the
Bear.
Cave Bear,
Right.
which was a serious...
I never read those, but so it's kind of been done. It's also like tying both hands behind your back, because at least for me, I feel like Cormac McCarthy could have written that novel, because he's a behaviorist who can just describe, I don't know, a woman giving birth unassisted by herself and a man rubbing two rocks together to spark fire, and it would be really compelling. But for me to forego my sense of humor and also my relationship to my own time, this book is really, for me, about the textures of what life feels like right now. And so when Bruno describes our problem, he says, like, the death drive is now in the driver's seat, which is frankly true.
Right.
He's looking for clues in the deep past for, like, where did we go wrong? And so it kind of started in terms of how it figures into the book as slightly a joke, not an unserious one, but a lot of times when you hear somebody who has a fully developed critique of capitalism, if they assign the wrong turn to a moment, it's generally speaking like the birth of the agricultural age. This is like 12,000 years ago. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if Bruno was like, no, it was 28,000 years ago. You know, when these growth at any cost mindset people, Homo sapiens, like rampaged Europe. They brought this new technology of the long-range throwing javelin, which, you know, the Neanderthal used like a really short-range spear. And so I thought Bruno is a guy who thinks you have to be on an intimate level with gore, like before you eat the animal, you have to be right up close to kill it. And then these other people show up with breadstick limbs. Right. They enjoy very large crowds. You know, so it's a bit romantic, the way that he attributes a sort of capacity to dream to the Neanderthal, and he says they're the real artists. And it's true when you look at what's been found among Neanderthal art, it's exclusively abstract art.
Right.
So he goes off on this whole riff about abstraction and it being the real art. And Homo sapiens, yeah, they made these like really incredibly technically virtuosic representations in caves such as Lascaux and Chauvet, but that is exclusively pictures of eating and killing.
Right. Right.
So I don't know.
Comfort with the gore. You know?
It sort of happened, but also I've known activists in Europe to be interested in primitivism, and I've thought a lot about that over the years. And at first I was more cynical about it because I sort of thought, if you are romanticizing earlier technologies, in a way, that's like the most modern thing a person could do. Because it's not like the Homo sapiens going, you know, since we developed this lightweight spear, we've really like lost our, you know what I mean?
That introspection.
Yeah, but the deeper I got into it, the more interested I became in Bruno. Because I think his desire to exit the driverless car is maybe also my desire, and it doesn't come with easy solutions.
No.
And so I traveled deep into his version of a solution.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, he literally lives in a cave, so it's like this, it's back to the landism taken to its sort of nth degree in a way, and it's the sort of historiography that's at work here, or the sort of development of these radical ideas moves from, we're actually not gonna sort of defeat or overturn capitalism. The choice is to leave it, in fact. And this is sort of what he ends up urging in certain ways.
Yeah, I mean, these caves in France, the part of France where I set the book is entirely, that underground world is all limestone caves and caverns, and they've been continuously inhabited by humans for 500,000 years. And you can see resistance graffiti in the caves, and like evidence that they were the sort of shelter for Albigensians retreating from the Catholic Church, and persecuted people for millennia have hidden in these caves. And so Bruno kind of believes that he can merge into the real human community and no longer be stuck in calendar time by going into the cave.
Right. And that's actually a very nice segue to one excellent question from you all. Someone here asked a question about your research process and how your imagination plays into it. When you're writing, do you find yourself imagining being inside these worlds, or the caves, as it were? Or is your process more observational? How does your imagination interact with the material you're working with or researching?
I'd say it's both, although I didn't really research this book. It's more like it was a wonderful occasion to put into a synthetic ground things I had just picked up in the course of life. And with the caves specifically, my son, Remy, went to this camp in a very remote part of the department Lot all through his childhood, and then he worked at that camp as a caving guide. And so he would go 2 kilometers underground, like wading through neck-deep water, and come out and tell me what he saw. I don't want to go and cave that deep. And so sometimes, if I just hear a really good detail, the detail alone is enough to tell me that there's a world there, that there's a part of a novel there. Like, he told me about this cave that had a ceiling that was as tall as a cathedral, and it was flocked completely in magnesium crystals that sparkled like snow and were white. And I thought,
beautiful image.
Holy moly, So I took that, and
it's nice to have a son who can go dig around caves for you.
Yeah, but it seems like the point of the question is like, well, then what part is imagined? Then I was thinking about the character Bruno talks about going down into his cave and living there for a fortnight to see what happens to his consciousness when he can't see.
Right.
And so I thought about that, like when you're in total darkness, and things happen when you're writing. And part of what is so pleasurable and special about fiction is you have an occasion, you make contact with your own unconscious, and you see things that you know about that didn't come up until then. And I was thinking, what would Bruno see? It just happened in the writing. I didn't have to search my mind. I immediately saw this photograph of Helen Keller, where she looks very beautiful and proud, and she's posing for the picture. I think she's wearing a black dress, and she has a magnolia flower in her lap. And the photo to me is about sense and blindness, and all the ways in which her senses were probably very acute, her sense of smell, and like what that magnolia flower felt like, what the leaves feel like. And so like Bruno has this thing about he can never truly unsee, because even in his effort to go completely dark, he sees a photograph of Helen Keller.
There it is. Sees the photo of Helen Keller. Another question, which is a short and sweet one, but the epigraph. Can you speak about the epigraph and why you chose it? I could read it. This is from Twelfth Night.
Yeah.
You say, "Close in the name of jesting. Lie thou there, for here comes the trout that must be caught with tickling."
Yeah, so when I was a child, my cousin Tovi would catch trout with his bare hands. And I've seen him do it. And I've told other people about that since, and people have gone, no way, like that doesn't exist. So people that can't catch fish with their hands. And people go, oh, like noodling, like they catch catfish, they put their fist in a mud hole. That's a completely different thing. Trout tickling, which I was told is what it's called, you put your hand in the water and you wait. And my cousin would wait hours to catch a fish. And the fish might pause next to a rock, and then it makes contact with your hand, and then it starts to move against the hand. And there is sense contact that apparently mesmerizes the fish so that it stays still. And my son was reading Twelfth Night in school, and so I was reading it along with him, and I got to that passage and thought, Shakespeare knew. It has a metaphoric purpose in that scene because it's about playing a trick on somebody, and it's about manipulation and also seduction. And my book is partly about that, because Sadie thinks that she's manipulating and seducing these people in this rural outpost where she arrives, but then she's reading Bruno's emails, and maybe he's manipulating and seducing her. But there's also a long sequence where Bruno describes learning to catch trout with his bare hands as a child, and it's significant to him because anthropologists always said that the Neanderthal was too stupid to catch fish.
Right. Bruno disagrees.
Bruno disagrees, yeah. I mean, that's like, I read anthropological, like academic paper about how Neanderthals probably didn't catch fish, and even though we have found residue of fish fat in some of their live sites, the speculation was that maybe there were just so many salmon in the salmon run that they were flopping up on the shores. It's like just flopping into their mouths, and there was no intentionality, or intellection to the catching of these fish. And so, yes, Bruno disagrees.
Bruno disagrees, indeed. This leads me to another question, which I love, and what you were just saying about Sadie and her capacities for manipulation and for seduction, and she uses seduction as a tool in various moments and ways in this book. But she also, of course, in her sort of arrogance and her cynicism, she has this riff, which is so striking, about people's salt and the sort of essence of people. And people are their 4 a.m. selves. This is who she's interested in. She wants to know what makes people tick, in a sense. And said, politics is nonsense, these beliefs. No, I want to know, I'm going to dig into their backstory, their psyche, understand it. As she says at one point, right, the salt is the core, the 4 a.m. reality of being. I adhere to my salt, I draw strength from it, I keep watch over my salt, and when it serves me, I keep watch over other people's salt, I mine my salt, and sometimes I mine the salt of others. Which is to say, I cooperate with the part of themselves they cannot reach. She says, sometimes when I'm lucky, I can see that quite well. That's all lead up to this question, which is, what makes a good spy? And what does a good spy share with a good writer, if anything?
Yeah, to think about that. I mean, yeah, she says there's no politics inside of people. And she's coming to that from a very cynical angle, because she's been infiltrating leftist activists, and it's, I think, in her interest to expose people's contradictions and to make it seem like they are not serious with their claims of what it is they really want to do. And I personally disagree with her about that, and can see that she has to de-sanctify the worlds that she aims to destroy, because it makes her feel no sense of guilt for having done that. At the same time, there is something about that I think is sort of true, about there being no politics inside of people, that maybe there's something more rudimentary. If, the 4 a.m. being, that's, I guess, from me, I feel like people know what that is. Like, you wake up in the middle of the night, and you are denuded of a certain noise of the day, of how you socially present to other people, and also how your ego formation works, like the version of you that you think you are, how you dress, how you signify, what radio station you listen to, who you vote for, who your friends are, what you believe. Some of that is gone in the middle of the night, and maybe there's a starker question of what you really believe about right and wrong. And so she's sort of advocating for this idea that there's some harder substrate inside of people, and I was interested in the metaphor of the substance of salt, which was the original money, like the word salary comes from it. But then Sadie says, I mine my salt and that of other people. So she thinks she can just manipulate people. I don't think that the writer shares that with her, and maybe instead is a more doubting creature. I'm kind of often trying to figure out what effect am I having on another person, and can I modulate, and what are they thinking? And I I think she thinks that she can already she's not curious about other people. She already thinks she knows what they think. And I've met people like that. It's kind of astonishing to be with somebody you realize they don't think other people can surprise them.
Right.
And I think the writer is somebody who is really interested in other people and also, frankly, really loves them. Like some of the books I love most in the world, I just taught the novel Fat City by Leonard Gardner. I don't know if people know that book. He loves people so much. I mean, he shows them as like flawed, messy, complicated people, but there is just a deep love, a reverence for people. And I don't know if The Spy can have that.
It wouldn't seem so, this spy in particular. And as you're talking, it makes me think of many writers talk about how they know when a book is working. And I wonder if you felt this way in those 14 months when you really discovered her as your narrator, that you know it's really working when your characters actually start surprising you and you don't know everything about them, right? You are the puppet master to a degree, but you know you're sort of really immersed in the storytelling if they start surprising you. Do you find that to be true? Did that happen in this book?
Yeah, well, I mentioned Jean-Patrick Manchette, this crime writer I really love, and how he would always have this kind of like full-blown fiasco as the penultimate scene of the book. And in my case, it was just going to be this agricultural fair, which is a very particular thing, and I love these fairs. I've been to a lot of them. So I put like a Guns N' Roses cover band at the fair because I have seen a Guns N' Roses.
I wanted to ask about the Guns N' Roses. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I used to love her, but I had to kill her as the refrain. It's amazing.
Right, it's in the book. I can only use one line without having to get approval and paying a fortune for more, but you get the idea from that one line. Yeah, actually that Guns N' Roses cover band that was playing at the agricultural fair I went to, there's one song by Guns N' Roses, I forget the title, but it has like a lot of ugly things we just don't say.
Right.
And the guy who was doing the axle, he had the headband, the handkerchief, he was barefoot and doing the side-to-side sway and everything. And when he got to these unspeakable lines, he just went, ah. It was like
it's pretty good.
An amazing solution. Anyway, so with I knew that I would have this agricultural fair, and there would be a French politician arriving to the fair, and Sadie has now been tasked with knocking off this guy. He is actually inspired by a real French politician who happened to have been in real life prime minister. And because I haven't graduated yet in my interest in noir to knock off a prime minister, I demoted him to deputy sub-minister in the Ministry of Rural Coherence, and I have him arriving, and the young militants have staged this protest to support the dairy farmers who are doing a milk dump. And I've seen these things in real life when they just empty all the milk out of their milk tanks. Right. And it's quite striking. It's Grapes of Wrath style, and the roads and the fields are just filled with white liquid. And so in setting up that scene, I did not know exactly what was going to happen. And so there was a kind of surprising...
We think, Sadie, we might have a big comeuppance, or we might have this shooting. Not to spoil it here, there's some logs, there's an accident.
There's some logs, there's an accident.
Yeah.
And also there's a Walter P. 38 handgun, and things do not go as she planned them. And that was all kind of just happened as I was writing it.
Love it. And that was, there was a couple other questions about noir, but I think you just spoke to the sort of conventions of noir and how you're engaging them, but also doing something slightly different. And I think actually, as we're sort of growing short on time, I actually wanted to conclude with something that you wrote, Rachel, in a different essay, in The Hard Crowd. We started off by talking about sort of that process of giving oneself permission to put all of oneself into one's work as a writer, and sort of that backstory of being at Berkeley as a sort of alienated undergrad, and coming to the vocation that you have come to in writing these marvelous books. And as you wrote in The Hard Crowd, in this one essay about San Francisco, that these lines that have really stuck with me since I first read them. Again, in the context of this piece called The Hard Crowd, you said, but as I said, I was the soft one, right? Maybe that's why I was so desperate to escape San Francisco, by which I mean desperate to leave a specific world inside that city, one I suspected I was too good for and at the same time felt inferior to. To be hard is to let things roll off you, to live in the present, not to dwell or worry. And even though I stayed out late, was committed to the end, some part of me had left early. To become a writer is to have left early, no matter what time you got home. And then I left for good, left San Francisco. My friends all stayed, but the place still defined me as it has them. But sometimes the million stories I've got and the million people I've known pelt the roof of my internal world like a hailstorm. I'm talking about my own life, which not only can't matter to you, it might bore you. So, get your own gig, make your litany, as I have just done, keep your tally, mind your dead and your living, and you can bore me. And I want to just say, nothing you've ever written has bored us. Your novels are deeply unboring, and thank you for coming to talk to us about Creation Lake. Please join me in thanking Rachel Kushner.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
Rachel will be signing books in back. Go home with one. They're beautiful.